The Peluvian Republic had stood for 6,000 years. Their civilization had weathered wars, plagues, and the collapse of neighboring empires. Their fleet numbered 300 vessels, each armed with particle beam arrays capable of cracking asteroids. Their defensive installations ringed their homeworld in layers of overlapping fire zones. When the Zephrani Concordat arrived in their system, the Peluvian High Senate convened with the confident gravity of a people who had never known defeat. That confidence lasted exactly 4 hours and 17 minutes. Lord Admiral Krives stood on the bridge of the Eternal Resolution, watching the sensor displays with the calm of a craftsman who had perfected his trade. 800 Concordat warships held formation around him, their hulls gleaming with the burnished silver that had become synonymous with inevitable submission across 300 star systems. He did not need to give orders. His fleet knew its role in this ancient dance. The Peluvians watched the Concordat armada arrange itself into the traditional flower of subjugation, a formation so vast that it filled their sensor screens from edge to edge. They calculated the tonnage, the firepower, the shield capacity. Their military advisors ran simulation after simulation, each one ending in the same conclusion. For 28 hours, the Peluvian High Senate debated. Their generals presented battle plans that ranged from aggressive to desperate. Their scientists examined every sensor reading, searching for weaknesses in Concordat technology. They found none that mattered. The admirals who advocated resistance were passionate and brave. The ministers who counseled surrender were pragmatic and cold. Both sides knew the mathematics were undeniable. In the Senate chamber, First Senator Velio stood to cast the deciding vote. Her family had led Peluvian military forces for 2,000 years. Her grandfather had died defending their homeworld against the Crithian invasion. She had sworn oaths to never yield Peluvian sovereignty. She voted to surrender. Our ancestors fought many battles, she told the Senate, her voice heavy with the weight of history. They won most of them, but they never faced an enemy like this. Courage is not throwing lives away for pride. Sometimes courage is accepting reality and living to fight another day, even if that day is centuries hence. 32 hours after the Concordat's arrival, the Peluvian High Senate transmitted their surrender. Krives accepted with the formal courtesy that the Concordat extended to all who chose wisdom over futility. The Peluvians would keep their government, their culture, their way of life. They would simply acknowledge Concordat authority, pay tribute, and provide military support when called upon. In the hierarchy of galactic civilizations, they would descend from sovereign power to vassal state, but they would survive. Krives filed his report that evening, noting the Peluvian surrender time with satisfaction. 32 hours represented a reasonable deliberation period for a civilization of their age and complexity. Some species submitted immediately, which suggested weakness of character. Others delayed for days, testing the Concordat's patience before accepting reality. The Peluvians had shown appropriate gravity in their decision-making while avoiding pointless heroics. As his staff began preparations for the integration process, Krives reviewed his next assignment. His tactical officer brought up the stellar cartography display, and a yellow star appeared in the holographic projection. Sol system, the officer reported. Single inhabited planet, third orbital position. Designation Earth. Population 8.2 billion. Technology level early spacefaring. No faster-than-light capability. No energy shielding. Chemical propulsion for most vessels. Krives studied the data with growing satisfaction. After the Peluvian campaign, which had required actual preparation and risk assessment, Earth would be a pleasant respite. His staff projected submission within 18 to 24 hours. Some optimistic junior officers suggested as little as 12 hours. They have one advantage, his intelligence officer noted. Unity. They recently formed something called the United Earth Coalition in response to preliminary Concordat scout activity. Unity without capability is irrelevant, Krives replied. Set course for Sol system. Standard approach vector. I want them to see us coming for 3 full days before we arrive. The Eternal Resolution and its escort fleet entered hyperspace, leaving the Peluvian system behind. In his quarters that night, Krives reviewed the historical records of Earth's military conflicts. The species was relatively young, having only reached spacefaring status in the last century. Their wars were primitive affairs fought with kinetic weapons and crude explosives. They had never encountered an alien civilization before the Concordat scout vessels appeared. They were, by every measure, utterly unprepared for what was coming. The Ninth Subjugation Fleet emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system on a Tuesday morning, Earth Standard Time. Krives had timed the arrival deliberately, ensuring that Earth's orbital monitoring stations would detect them during peak operational hours. He wanted humanity's leaders to receive the news while they were alert and capable of rational thought. The fleet did not rush. They accelerated to a stately cruising speed, their formation perfect, their course unwavering. They would reach Earth in 73 hours, giving humanity ample time to comprehend what approached. On Earth, the detection triggered cascading alerts through every military and governmental system on the planet. Secretary General Thomas Reeves was pulled from a budget meeting to a crisis chamber deep beneath Geneva. General James Kurtz was already there, staring at a holographic display that showed 800 ships approaching in formation, so precise that computers had initially mistaken it for a sensor artifact. "Tell me those numbers are wrong," Reeves said quietly. "They're not," Kurtz replied. He was a compact man with iron-gray hair and eyes that had seen 3 wars before humanity ever reached the stars. 800 capital ships, each one massing more than our largest carrier. They're not hiding. They're not rushing. They're making sure we see them coming. The United Earth Coalition convened within the hour. Representatives from every nation gathered in person or via secure link, their faces showing varying degrees of fear, anger, and desperate calculation. Intelligence briefings painted a grim picture. The Concordat had subjugated 47 star systems in the last century alone. Their method was consistent: overwhelming force, clear terms, and the implicit promise that cooperation meant survival while resistance meant annihilation. "Every civilization that surrendered to them still exists," the European Federation representative said. "Every civilization that fought them was destroyed." "They let conquered people keep their governments and cultures," added the Asian Alliance delegate. "We would lose sovereignty, but we would survive." Kurtz stood, and the room quieted. He had opposed the formation of the United Earth Coalition, believing it gave too much power to politicians. But when the Concordat scouts had arrived, he had been the first to argue for unified command. Whatever his feelings about bureaucracy, he understood that divided forces were defeated forces. "I've been studying their conquests," Kurtz said. 47 systems, 47 victories. The longest any species held out was 13 days. The Crithian Defense Pact had 200 warships and fought for 13 days before surrendering. "That proves resistance is futile," the European representative said, "or it proves no one's tried hard enough." Kurtz's voice was flat. "The Crithians lost their entire fleet in 6 major engagements, then surrendered. But what if they'd kept fighting? What if they'd made the Concordat pay for every kilometer, every city, every victory until it cost more than it was worth?" "You're suggesting we fight a war we cannot win?" Reeves asked. "I'm suggesting we fight a war they can't afford," Kurtz replied. "They don't want to annihilate us, they want to rule us. That means they need us alive, functional, and eventually compliant. That gives us leverage." The debate raged for 18 hours. In the end, the vote was far from unanimous. 9 nations voted to surrender immediately, 7 voted to negotiate for better terms, and 11 voted to resist. The final tally was so close that it required Reeves to cast the deciding vote as Secretary General. He thought of his grandchildren, playing in a park in Berlin, unaware that monsters had come from the stars. He thought of the Concordat's terms, which would make Earth a vassal state, its people subjects of an empire that had conquered half the local galactic cluster. He thought of his grandfather who had fought in the Third World War and had told him, "Freedom isn't given by conquerors, it's taken." "We fight," Reeves said. The Concordat received Earth's response 72 hours after their arrival, precisely when their ultimatum expired. Lord Admiral Krives read the message 3 times, certain there had been a translation error. "No, nothing else. No explanation, no counterproposal, no request for better terms. Just a single word in English, followed by translations in Mandarin, Spanish, Hindi, Arabic, and 40 other human languages, as if Earth wanted to be absolutely certain the Concordat understood their answer. They must not comprehend our capability, Krives's tactical officer suggested. They have sensors, Krives replied, staring at the message. They can count our ships. Then perhaps it's cultural. Some species have religious or ideological compulsions that override survival instinct. Krives considered this. It was possible. The Concordat had encountered 3 species with religious objections to submission. All 3 had been annihilated when they refused to reconsider. He disliked such outcomes. Destroyed civilizations produced no tribute, required no governance, and served only as cautionary tales. Open a channel, he ordered. Broadcast on all frequencies. When the channel opened, Krives spoke with the measured patience of a teacher addressing a stubborn student. People of Earth, you have refused our terms. This suggests a failure of understanding. We are the Zephrani Concordat. We have brought order to 300 star systems. We do not bluff. We do not negotiate. We demonstrate, you comprehend, you submit. This is the natural order of power. You have courage, but courage without wisdom is suicide. We will demonstrate our capability. Then you will reconsider. You have 12 hours. He closed the channel and nodded to his weapons officer. Target their military satellite network, precision strikes, disable but do not destroy. Let them watch what we can do. The demonstration was surgical. Concordat lance beams reached across the void and touched Earth's military satellites with precision measured in centimeters. 43 satellites went dark, their systems fused by directed energy. Not destroyed, simply rendered inert. The message was clear. We can reach anything in your orbit and we can do it without wasting ammunition. Krives waited for the reconsideration. Instead, humanity launched its fleet. 122 warships accelerated from Earth orbit, from lunar anchorages, from hidden positions in the asteroid belt. They were crude things built for patrol duty and pirate suppression, not fleet combat. Their weapons were railguns and missile batteries. Their armor was layered titanium and ceramic composites. Against the Concordat's energy shields and directed energy weapons, they were the equivalent of bronze spears facing modern artillery. But they came anyway. Kurtz watched from his command center as humanity's entire military space capability accelerated toward an enemy that outmassed them by a factor of 50. He knew what the next hours would bring. He had run the simulations 1,000 times, each one ending in defeat. But he had also studied every Concordat campaign, looking for patterns, for weaknesses, for any edge that might exist. All ships, he broadcast, engage at maximum range, hit and run, make them chase you, make every shot count. The first engagement lasted 43 minutes. Human railguns hammered at Concordat shields, causing them to flicker and fade but rarely penetrate. Human missiles were intercepted by point defense systems that tracked and eliminated threats with mechanical precision. When Concordat warships returned fire, human ships died. The carrier Washington took a direct hit and broke apart, spilling atmosphere and debris. The destroyer Nelson lost its engines and tumbled helplessly. The cruiser Mumbai's magazine detonated, creating a brief new sun in Earth's orbit. 31 human ships were destroyed. The Concordat lost none. Kurtz watched the casualty reports cascade across his screens and felt a cold fury settle in his chest. Not fury at the Concordat for being powerful, but fury at the universe for making power so unevenly distributed. He had watched good crews die to prove a point, and that point was simply that humanity could die with dignity. But as he studied the engagement data, he noticed something. The Concordat had adjusted their formations 3 times to avoid human missile salvos. They had repositioned ships to maintain shield coverage. They had retreated when human vessels attempted ramming maneuvers. They had, in short, treated the human fleet as a threat worth taking seriously, even if only barely. All ships, Kurtz broadcast, fall back to defensive positions. Damage report in 30 minutes. We go again tomorrow. On the Eternal Resolution, Krives reviewed the engagement with satisfaction. The human fleet had fought bravely, as many species did in their first real taste of Concordat power. They would now understand the futility of resistance. He composed another message to Earth's leadership, praising their courage while urging them to accept reality. General Kurtz's response arrived 6 hours later. "Courage isn't something you give out like medals. You take it. We're taking ours back. Tomorrow, same time. Bring more ships if you're worried." Krives stared at the message, feeling something he rarely experienced: confusion. The tone was wrong. Species that had just lost 30% of their fleet in a single engagement either surrendered or descended into despair. They did not issue challenges. "Analysis," he demanded. "Cultural profile. What am I missing?" His intelligence officer brought up psychological profiles compiled from Earth's communications and media. "They're aggressive, Lord Admiral. Competitive. Their global culture celebrates struggle and overcoming odds. They have thousands of stories about small forces defeating larger ones through determination." "Stories are not reality," Krives said. "No, Lord Admiral, but they believe them anyway." The second engagement happened exactly as Kurtz had promised. The human fleet, now reduced to 91 ships, attacked again. But this time they used different tactics. They separated into small hunter groups, attacked from multiple vectors, and focused fire on individual Concordat ships. When a human vessel was crippled, its crew evacuated to nearby ships, and the cripple accelerated toward the nearest Concordat vessel on a collision course. The destroyer Defiant managed to reach the Concordat cruiser Harmonious Order before being destroyed. But it got close enough that its self-destruct charge, amplified by its remaining fuel and magazine, punched through the cruiser's shields and cracked its hull. The Harmonious Order did not explode, but it did go dark, its crew evacuating in escape pods. Krives watched the first Concordat loss in decades and felt something shift in his understanding of this campaign. Humans were not fighting to win. They were fighting to make victory expensive. 28 more human ships died in that engagement. But the Concordat lost its first vessel, and the psychological impact rippled through both fleets. Human crews cheered and redoubled their efforts. Concordat crews began flying more cautiously, maintaining greater distances, treating human ships with wary respect. When the human fleet retreated again, Kurtz sent another message. "One of yours for 28 of ours. Bad math for us. But your ship's not coming back and ours will be replaced next week. How many can you afford to lose?" It was a bluff. Humanity could not replace its losses. Their shipyards were running at maximum capacity just to repair damaged vessels. But Krives did not know that, and the uncertainty gnawed at him. He escalated. Concordat orbital bombardment began on the 10th day of the siege. Precision strikes targeted military installations, carefully avoiding civilian centers. Kurtz watched his ground-based command structure dissolve under lance beam fire. Hardened bunkers evaporated. Underground facilities were excavated by sustained fire and left open to the sky. Missile sites, airfields, naval bases, all marked with the characteristic scorch patterns of directed energy weapons. The casualty count climbed. 140,000 dead, most of them military personnel, but thousands of civilians who lived near military installations or worked in defense industries. Krives sent another ultimatum, certain that the death toll would break human resistance. Instead, he received footage. It was a historical compilation, assembled by Earth's propaganda ministry and broadcast on every channel. It showed humans fighting impossible odds throughout their history. Spartans at Thermopylae holding a pass against a Persian army. Defenders at the Alamo fighting to the last man. Stalingrad burning as Soviet soldiers contested every building. Warsaw rising in doomed rebellion. The footage included casualty figures, odds ratios, and outcomes. Most of the battles shown ended in defeat. But the message was clear. Humans had always fought impossible odds, and they had always eventually won the larger war even when they lost specific battles. Kurtz's voice narrated the compilation. "You think you're the first empire to knock on our door. You're not even close. We've been killing empires since before we reached the stars. The only question is how much this costs you before you figure that out." Krives watched the compilation twice, trying to understand the psychology behind it. These were not victories being celebrated. These were massacres, defeats, desperate last stands. Why would Earth broadcast its own history of failure? His cultural advisor provided insight. They're not celebrating victory, Lord Admiral. They're celebrating resistance itself. For humans, the act of fighting against impossible odds has value independent of outcome. They seem to believe that some things are worth dying for, even if death is certain. That's irrational, Krives said. Yes, Lord Admiral, but they do it anyway. The siege entered its third week. Human ships continued attacking, using increasingly desperate tactics. Commercial vessels were armed with improvised weapons and sent on one-way missions. Mining ships accelerated to ramming speed and dove into concordat formations. A human cargo hauler that had hidden near Jupiter ambushed a concordat supply convoy, destroying 2 vessels before being annihilated. Krives's ships adapted, maintaining greater spacing, scanning for hidden threats, treating every piece of orbital debris as a potential weapon. But adaptation required caution, and caution slowed operations. What should have been a swift subjugation had become a grinding siege with no clear endpoint. On Earth, the devastation mounted. Major cities burned. Power grids failed. Supply chains collapsed. 2 million people died in the first 3 weeks, most from the bombardment, others from the breakdown of services and infrastructure. But humanity did not surrender. Kurtz operated from a mobile command center that moved every 6 hours, staying ahead of concordat targeting. He had lost weight, aged years, and developed a persistent cough from stress and lack of sleep. But he continued coordinating Earth's defense with the manic focus of a man who knew surrender was not an option, because he had burned that bridge behind him. They're adapting to our tactics faster than we're developing new ones, his operations officer reported. We need something they haven't seen before. Kurtz studied the tactical displays, watching concordat ships maintain their blockade. He had engineers working on reverse engineering concordat technology from debris and captured wreckage. The process was slow, complicated by humanity's lack of understanding of fundamental concordat physics, but they were making progress. How long until the hybrid ships are ready? He asked. 2 weeks for the first prototype, maybe another month for a combat-ready squadron. We don't have a month, Kurtz made a decision. Accelerate the program. I don't care if they're unstable. I don't care if the crews know they're flying death traps. We need something that can hurt them badly enough to make them reconsider. The hybrid program, designated Project Endurance, retrofitted human ships with concordat shield generators and energy weapons scavenged from wrecked vessels. The technology was poorly understood, the integration was crude, and the first test firing resulted in the prototype destroyer losing all power for 6 hours. But the second test worked, and the third test actually managed to penetrate a captured concordat shield in controlled conditions. Kurtz authorized full production. On the 49th day of the siege, Krives received an urgent communication from Concordat High Command. The message was terse and pointed. Status report on Sol 3 integration. Integration. As if Earth were already conquered, just waiting for the paperwork to be filed. Krives composed his response carefully. Resistance continues. Local population demonstrates unusual persistence. Require additional time to achieve compliance without violating civilian casualty protocols. The reply came 8 hours later. 49 days is unacceptable. You have been at Sol 3 longer than the previous 8 campaigns combined. Recommend immediate escalation or strategic withdrawal. Strategic withdrawal. The words hung in Krives's mind like an accusation. In 3 centuries of concordat expansion, no fleet commander had ever withdrawn from a subjugation campaign. To do so would be to admit that overwhelming force could be resisted, that the Concordat's method could fail. But to continue indefinitely was to turn Earth into a quagmire that consumed resources and attention, while the rest of Concordat space watched and wondered why the mighty Ninth Fleet couldn't conquer a primitive world. Krives made a decision. He would escalate beyond precision strikes, targeting dual-use infrastructure that supplied both military and civilian needs. He would increase the pressure until Earth's economy collapsed and its population demanded their government surrender to end the suffering. It was a calculated cruelty, designed to break human will without exterminating the species. The Concordat needed live subjects, not dead martyrs. The bombardment intensified. Power plants were destroyed, leaving entire continents dark. Water treatment facilities were targeted, creating public health crises. Transportation hubs were obliterated, paralyzing supply chains. The death toll climbed to 5 million, then 7 million. And still, humanity fought. On the 62nd day, 3 human ships equipped with hybrid Concordat technology ambushed a Concordat patrol. The engagement lasted 11 minutes and resulted in the destruction of all 3 human ships and 2 Concordat vessels. But it proved that human technology had evolved, that Earth was learning and adapting faster than anticipated. Krives's staff gathered for an emergency assessment. The mood was grim. "We've lost 23 ships," his tactical officer reported. "That's more than we lost in the previous 20 campaigns combined. Crew morale is declining. Officers are requesting reassignment. And High Command is asking why we haven't withdrawn." "Because we cannot," Krives said quietly. "If we withdraw, every vassal state in Concordat space will know that resistance is possible. The Peluvians, the Varani, the Crithians, all of them will reconsider their submission. Our entire empire is built on the premise that resistance is futile. If Earth proves that premise false, the Concordat will face rebellions on 100 worlds. Then we must break them," his weapons officer said. "Full planetary bombardment, annihilate their cities until they beg us to stop." "That would violate Concordat law," Krives replied. "We would become war criminals and Earth would become a radioactive wasteland worth nothing to us. No, we need them alive and functional, which means we need them to surrender." "They won't," his intelligence officer said quietly. "I've been studying their culture for 2 months now. They won't surrender. Not because they think they can win, but because they've decided that some outcomes are worse than death. And living under Concordat rule is, to them, one of those outcomes." Krives stared at the human homeworld on his display, this blue and white sphere that had somehow become the rock on which the Concordat's reputation was breaking. He had underestimated them. He had treated them as he treated every other species, assuming that rational beings would choose survival over pointless death. But humans were not rational, not in the way the Concordat understood rationality. They calculated differently, weighing intangibles like dignity and freedom against tangibles like casualties and resources. And by their mathematics, the equation balanced in favor of continued resistance. On the 71st day, Krives received orders from High Command: complete subjugation within 10 days or withdraw. The Ninth Fleet has become a symbol of Concordat weakness. This cannot continue. 10 days. Krives looked at the tactical situation and knew it was impossible. He could not break human resistance in 10 days without committing atrocities that would haunt the Concordat for centuries. But he could not withdraw without admitting defeat. He sat alone in his quarters that night, staring at strategic projections that all led to the same conclusion. Every model showed that complete subjugation would require at least 6 more months and cost perhaps 200 ships. The Concordat would win eventually through sheer attrition, but the cost would be unprecedented, and every day the siege continued sent a message to every vassal world: resistance is possible. He thought of his career, his reputation, the 300 systems that bore Concordat rule because commanders like him had never failed. He thought of the human broadcasts, their defiant messages, their willingness to die rather than kneel. And he made a decision that would either save his career or end it. He requested direct communication with Earth's leadership. The request surprised everyone, most of all Secretary General Reeves and General Kurtz. They accepted the call, curious what the Concordat commander wanted after 71 days of siege. Krives appeared on their screens, his reptilian features showing signs of strain that human eyes were learning to read. "I wish to understand," he said without preamble. "You cannot win this war. You must know this. Your casualties are catastrophic. Your infrastructure is destroyed. Your fleet is decimated. Why do you continue?" Kurtz leaned forward, his eyes locked on the alien commander. because you made a mistake on day one. What mistake? You thought we'd calculate the odds and surrender, but you know what? We did calculate the odds. We knew we'd lose. We accepted that before your first ship fired. The question was never whether we could beat you. The question was whether we'd let you beat us without making you pay a price so high that you'd regret ever coming here. That is irrational, Kryves said. No, Reeves interjected. That's human. You want to understand us. Here's the thing about humanity. We're really good at losing battles. We've had lots of practice. But we're also really good at making losses so expensive that we win the war anyway. You want Earth. You can have it. But the price is your fleet, your reputation, and the message you're sending to every species watching this. And they are watching, aren't they? Kryves was silent for a long moment. Then he asked, what would it take for you to surrender? More than you can offer, Kurtz replied. Because surrender means living under your rules, following your orders, becoming part of your empire. And we've decided that's not acceptable, not at any price. Then you choose extinction. No, Kurtz said. We choose resistance. There's a difference. Extinction is what happens when you stop fighting. Resistance is what happens when you decide some things matter more than survival. You can kill us all, but you can't make us submit. And as long as one human is still fighting, we haven't lost. The communication ended. Kryves sat in silence, understanding finally settling over him like a shroud. He had not been fighting a military campaign. He had been fighting a philosophy, a worldview so fundamentally different from Concordat thinking that he had failed to recognize it for what it was. The Concordat conquered through overwhelming force combined with the promise of survival. Their method worked because every rational species eventually calculated that submission was better than annihilation. But humans had rejected that calculation. They had decided that some futures were worse than no future, and they were willing to die to avoid those outcomes. Against such a species, conventional subjugation was impossible. Kryves composed his final orders. He would withdraw, spinning it as a strategic decision rather than a defeat. He would cite the need to preserve fleet strength, the lack of strategic value in Earth's system, the inefficient resource allocation of a prolonged siege. He would use every euphemism in military vocabulary to avoid the word failure. But he would withdraw. On the 79th day of the siege, the Concordat Ninth Fleet began jumping out of the Sol system. They did so in perfect formation, maintaining the dignity and precision that characterized all Concordat operations. But they left, and humanity watched them go with a mixture of disbelief and exhaustion. Kurt stood in his command center, staring at the displays showing Concordat vessels vanishing one by one into hyperspace. He had not slept in 2 days. His hands shook from stimulants and stress. Around him, officers were crying, laughing, or simply staring in silence at the impossible thing that had just happened. "Did we win?" someone asked. "No," Kurtz said quietly, "but we didn't lose, and sometimes that's enough." Earth began counting its dead. 9 million casualties, 40% of orbital infrastructure destroyed, 63% of the fleet lost, 20% of industrial capacity eliminated. The planet would take decades to recover, perhaps longer, but it would recover as a free world, not a vassal state. In the Peluvian Republic, First Senator Velios watched the Sol 3 transmissions with growing fascination. For 4 months, she and her intelligence committee had monitored Earth's resistance, studying human tactics with the careful attention of military scholars. The Concordat had tried to suppress information about the siege, but data leaked through vassal state communications networks. Every conquered world was watching. Velios saw something in Earth's resistance that resonated with her own shame. When she had voted to surrender, she had told herself it was wisdom. She had convinced herself that her ancestors would understand. But watching humans die by the millions rather than submit, she realized she had not been wise. She had been afraid. 6 months after the Concordat's withdrawal from Sol system, Velios convened the Peluvian High Senate for an emergency session. The debate was fierce, but the conclusion was unanimous. If primitive Earth could resist the Concordat for 79 days and force them to withdraw, then the Peluvians, with their advanced technology and proud martial tradition, could resist indefinitely. Our ancestors did not build this republic to hand it over to the first empire powerful enough to threaten us, Velios declared. Earth showed us that power is not everything. Will is what matters. Humanity chose to fight impossible odds because they believed freedom was worth any price. Are we, who have claimed to be warriors for 6,000 years, less brave than a species that only reached the stars a century ago? The vote was unanimous. The Peluvian Republic declared independence from the Concordat. The Concordat sent a subjugation fleet. The Peluvians fought back, and this time they did not surrender after token resistance. They studied Earth's tactics, the hit-and-run attacks, the kamikaze runs, the focus on making every victory expensive. They adapted these tactics to their superior technology and made the Concordat pay for every system, every planet, every victory. Other vassal states watched and learned. The Concordat had ruled for 3 centuries through the illusion of inevitability. Earth had shattered that illusion. Now, rebellions began sprouting across Concordat space like fires in a drought-stricken forest. The Varani Collective, which had submitted after only 3 days of resistance, reclaimed their independence 18 months after Earth's victory. The Crithian Defense Pact, humiliated by their 13-day capitulation, rose in rebellion 2 years later. Each uprising cited Earth's example. Each one used variants of human tactics. Each one proved that the Concordat could be resisted. The empire that had conquered 300 star systems began to fracture. The Concordat's military was designed for subjugation campaigns against isolated targets, not for fighting simultaneous rebellions across dozens of systems. Their fleets, stretched thin, began suffering defeats. Worlds that had been vassals for generations reclaimed their sovereignty. The Concordat did not collapse, but it contracted. Within 5 years of Earth's resistance, they had lost nearly 40% of their territory. The empire that had seemed invincible was revealed to be brittle, held together by fear, and the assumption that resistance was futile. Earth had proven that assumption false. Lord Admiral Krives was reassigned to a minor border patrol, far from the chaos consuming the Concordat's inner territories. His career was not destroyed, but it was effectively ended. He spent his final years before retirement writing tactical analyses of the Sol III campaign, trying to understand where the Concordat's method had failed. His conclusion was simple and devastating. Earth was not conquered because Earth refused to acknowledge the rules of conquest. They did not surrender because they did not accept our authority to demand surrender. Against such a species, conventional subjugation is impossible. Recommendation: avoid engagement with humanity. They are not worth the cost. Not in ships, not in time, not in the example they provide to others who might resist. The Concordat's military academy added the Sol III campaign to its curriculum as a cautionary case study. Young officers studied it, debated it, and learned from it. The conclusion was always the same. Some species cannot be conquered by force alone, and humanity was such a species. On Earth, humanity rebuilt. Engineers reverse-engineered Concordat technology from captured debris. Shipyards constructed new vessels incorporating lessons learned from the siege. The United Earth Coalition, forged in the fires of mutual survival, solidified into a permanent government structure. And in the halls of the UN building in Geneva, a memorial was erected. It listed the names of every ship lost, every crew member killed, every soldier and civilian who died resisting the Concordat. At the top, a simple inscription: "They came to make us kneel. We taught them to leave." General Kurtz stood before that memorial on the first anniversary of the siege's end. He was older now, grayer, moving with the careful precision of a man whose body had been pushed beyond its limits and never quite recovered. Reporters asked him what humanity had learned from its first contact with an alien civilization. He thought for a long moment before answering. "We learned we're not alone in the universe. We learned there are empires out there that make our worst dictators look like amateurs. We learned that the galaxy is a dangerous place filled with species that see us as primitives, animals, resources to be exploited." He paused, looking up at the names carved into the memorial. "But we also learned something else. We learned that those empires, for all their power and technology, can be resisted. We learned that submission isn't inevitable, that some things are worth fighting for even when you know you'll lose. And most importantly, we learned that we're not the ones who should be afraid. He turned to face the cameras directly. Because here's the thing about humanity, we don't surrender. We don't calculate the odds and choose survival over freedom. We look at impossible situations and ask, how do we make this cost them more than it's worth? That's our advantage. Not technology, not numbers, not firepower. Just the absolute stubborn refusal to accept defeat on someone else's terms. Somewhere in Concordat space, in the vast bureaucracy that governed what remained of their empire, Earth's status was being updated in official records. The designation changed from subjugation target to avoid engagement. In the comments section, a note was added by an intelligence analyst who had studied the Sol 3 campaign extensively. Humanity represents a new category of species, unconquerable by conventional means. They possess neither superior technology nor numerical advantage, yet they demonstrated sustained resistance against overwhelming force for 79 days. Analysis suggests this resistance could have continued indefinitely, as human psychology does not incorporate the concept of unwinnable wars. Recommend permanent exclusion from Concordat expansion planning. Species designation updated to Deathworlder. Threat level, extreme. The analyst closed the file and moved on to other assessments, unaware that this single report would change Concordat policy for the next century. Earth was marked on every military star chart with a warning symbol, the first time such a designation had been applied to a species the Concordat had actually engaged. And in the cold mathematics of interstellar empire building, that symbol meant more than any military victory could have achieved. It meant that humanity, despite losing nearly every battle, had won something more valuable. They had proven they could not be conquered. And in a galaxy where power was measured by the ability to subjugate others, being unconquerable was its own form of victory. The siege of Earth ended not with triumph or defeat, but with a question that would echo across the stars for generations. If humans could resist with such primitive technology, what would they become once they truly reached the stars? The Concordat did not want to find out. Neither did the dozen other empires that quietly updated their expansion plans to exclude Sol's system. Humanity had not won the war for the galaxy, but they had won the war for Earth. And in doing so, they had issued a declaration to the universe. We are here. We will not kneel. And we are just getting started.